Each year we get a lot of questions about pre-harvest burn downs and desiccation. And let me just first start by saying, when at all possible, we don't want to do these applications because they cost money, and you know what, our yield's basically already made. But certainly there are some situations when you may need to do it. We're going to talk about those today. Before we get to those though, let me just say this. Anytime you're doing a pre-harvest burn down, it's likely to hurt the germination of that seed. So when it's for seed production, we don't want to do pre-harvest burn downs or desiccations. We want to avoid those just so we don't have any worry about germination.
You know what's interesting when you make that comment, Brian? There was some seed being produced last winter in South America. And they're having a really rainy spell about the time the seed needed to be harvested, and they're starting to panic. Wow, we need to get the seed out of here, and everything is so wet, the plants are not dying down. So they decided we're gonna have to do a pre-harvest burn down. Even though it's seed production, they thought that's gonna be our only chance to get the stuff out of the field before we catch more rain. So they did a pre-harvest burn down on some Liberty Link seed with Roundup, but they did it so close to harvest, then all of a sudden the sun came out, everything was good, and they just mowed right through it. They didn't have enough time for that pre-harvest interval. When we're thinking about a pre-harvest burn down, we do have to keep in mind there is a pre-harvest window, and the reason why is because there could still be some residue in that seed. The problem is that seed came up to North America, got planted this spring, and there were a few fields across the whole country, just a few, no big deal. It was one seed lot that had some residue of Roundup in that seed, and the plants suffered from that early in the spring. So we do want to be cautious of that. We're going to talk about a number of different options that you may have, but do adhere to those pre-harvest intervals. They're there for an important reason.
Okay, so when we talk about the main reasons why you might want a desiccation or pre-harvest burn down, Darren just got to one, and that's, hey, I want to get my harvest done at a certain time. So especially when we go to the southern United States or even the coast, we see a lot more of this type of thing happening. In the Midwest, we don't see a lot of desiccation being done on corn or soybeans or wheat, but on some of the specialty crops, we very well might. When we talk about options there in terms of which products you can use, we really like Gramoxone, but there are other products available, like Darren mentioned Roundup. There's also Sharpen, Valor, and a number of different products. You just have to check the label for your particular crop because there are all these products and not all of them are labeled on every crop.
Well, you have to also think about, all right, I need to do this desiccation, but if there's a few weeds out there, I would really like to control those weeds as well, and that'll make harvest go a lot easier. The challenge right now is a lot of those weeds may be the Roundup resistant weeds. We're hearing a lot of calls from around the country. Hey, I've got some mare's tail out there. I've got some pigweed out there. I have some ragweed that I wasn't able to kill in crop. I would like to clean those out without the combine having to chug through all those green plants and trying to mow them off. But if those weeds are out there, spraying Roundup for your desiccation alone isn't going to do anything for those weeds. So you may be looking at some of the other options that you could use that could clean up the weeds. And you know, chances are those weeds are great big, and getting coverage down to the bottom of those weeds with a contact killer is going to be pretty tough.
Yeah, and the other thing about that is there are certain rates that are labeled as well. So you might not be able to go to the maximum rate that you could in a general burn down situation pre-plant. And if we're talking about lower rates with this desiccation application, you know, you just kind of have to hope for the best. But the biggest piece of advice we have for you there is pick the right day. Gramoxone, for example. It works better when you get a nice, sunny, warm day, and if you can get great spray coverage. So don't be trying your pre-harvest burn downs with something like Gramoxone or Sharpen or Valor where we need contact. Don't try those with 8 gallons of water or 5 gallons of water. Use 15 gallons of water and good spray pressure. Really get that great coverage. Because remember, everything's big at that point, and these products are contact killers. It's different than Roundup or Banville or 2,4-D. With a lot of these desiccation products, we've got to have that great spray coverage.
The other thing is you're going to have to pick the right spray day where you don't have a big wind or something like that, because you're going to need to go with flat fan nozzles to get this great coverage. Keep in mind, flat fan nozzles are going to create a smaller droplet, so it can potentially move with wind. So if we're spraying something that's prone to some wind movement, we want to be real careful with that with the flat fan nozzles. The next thing with those nozzles is you want to maintain the proper height above the crop. With most flat fans, you're going to want a spray pattern starting about 20 inches above the crop. You don't need to be 5 feet above the crop, but you do need to be at least 20 inches as you're going across the field. So if you're going through some uneven terrain and that boom is going to be bouncing, you're certainly going to have to be a little higher than 20 inches to make sure you're always at least 20 inches. That way you have a nice spray pattern.
One other thing I'd mention is spray adjuvants. A lot of times we don't think too much about the adjuvant, but it is incredibly important with many of these desiccation and pre-harvest burn down products. Usually methylated seed oil is our best recommendation, but crop oil concentrate also works pretty well, especially when we talk about Gramoxone, Sharp, and Valor. They all require the use of those products. Even if you're mixing something else in there that doesn't need it, just remember, anytime you get Gramoxone, Sharp, and Valor, and many of the other desiccation products, use methylated seed oil or crop oil.
You've got to get that thing done right around September 1st. So you want to have that product on hand and be ready to go when the day comes.
Well, once again, pre-harvest burn downs and desiccations can fit in some situations. We don't want to do it unless we have to, but in some cases there are definitely reasons why you might want to spray.
Well, one thing you may be spraying for is our weed of the week. Have you identified this week's weed?